Welcome to our deep dive. Today, we're going to be talking about the really, really fascinating and kind of complex world of J. Robert Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
You've given us a biography to work with, as well as the screenplay for Christopher Nolan's film, Oppenheimer.
Right.
It's interesting because they're very different ways of dealing with this figure in history.
Yeah, they really are.
It's like getting a 3D model of Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
You know, the biography gives us this sort of raw material, the structure,
Yeah.
you know, and the film lets us see him moving around and breathing in a very sort of compressed and dramatic space.
Yeah.
So our mission today is to unpack how each of the sources that you've given us tackles a few different things. Key events in Oppenheimer's life, the moral themes that come up, and then just the man himself.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting right off the bat is where they choose to start, like how they begin telling the story.
Yeah.
So the biography really lays out Oppenheimer's privileged upbringing. You know, we see his early obsession with physics, and it even, delves into his struggles with mental health. It's like they're building a foundation brick by brick before we even get to the, the creation of the bomb.
And there's that incident, where he tries to poison his tutor with a cyanide-laced apple.
Right.
I mean, it's chilling, but it's also, it reveals so much about him.
Absolutely, yeah.
But the film handles all of this so differently.
Right. Nolan just kind of drops us right into the Manhattan Project.
Yeah.
And he uses flashbacks to sort of sprinkle in those details about Oppenheimer's past.
Right.
It's a very deliberate stylistic choice that immediately throws us into this feeling of tension and urgency.
Yeah.
And instead of that poisoned apple, that really dark moment from the biography,
Right.
we get this recurring image of a shrinking sun, which is Nolan's visual metaphor for Oppenheimer's understanding of gravitational collapse.
It's almost like Nolan is saying, like, hey, we all know this guy's brilliant, but look at the scale of his thinking, and maybe even the potential for destruction that comes along with that.
Absolutely. And I think the effect is it really raises the stakes from the beginning.
Yeah.
It makes you realize, okay, this is a story about more than just, one man's life.
So what do you think the film loses by condensing his early life in that way?
Well, I mean, it definitely sacrifices some of the depth
Yeah.
that we get in the biography in terms of his psychological portrait, but it gains narrative momentum.
Right.
It's like choosing between a really slow burn character study
Right.
and a thriller.
Yeah.
They're both valid, but they have very different effects.
I guess it depends on what you're going for.
Exactly.
So let's dive into another really interesting and important aspect of Oppenheimer's life, politics and relationships.
Okay.
The biography really meticulously details all of this stuff. His left-wing affiliations, his passionate affair with Jean Tatlock, who's a member of the Communist Party,
Right.
and the tragic circumstances of her death. You really see the personal cost of his brilliance
Yeah.
and the political climate of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nolan doesn't shy away from those elements either.
Yeah.
He uses very carefully chosen scenes and dialogue to weave them into the narrative.
Right.
And one of the most striking examples of this is how he uses black and white versus color to distinguish between Oppenheimer's professional and personal life.
Yeah.
It's a really clever way of visually highlighting the tension between those realms.
Yeah, it's a great example of how the film compensates for its lack of detail with visual storytelling, right? It's not just telling us about the tension,
Yeah.
it's making us feel it.
Exactly. And I think while the film might not provide all of the context that the biography does,
Right.
those stylistic choices create a powerful emotional undercurrent
Yeah.
that keeps us really hooked.
Totally. And what struck you about how each of the sources handles these very personal details?
Well, I think the film's use of visual metaphors is just incredibly effective at capturing the mood and the atmosphere. But for a truly nuanced understanding of, Oppenheimer's political leanings.
Yeah, it's like comparing a painting to a photograph. One evokes a feeling,
Right.
the other captures reality in all its messy detail.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And it really highlights the strengths of each form.
Yeah.
They're not in competition with each other.
Right.
They're offering different layers of understanding.
Well, speaking of layers, let's move to the heart of it all,
Okay.
the Manhattan Project.
Here's where I think that tension between the biography's kind of evidence-driven approach and the film's dramatic compression
Right.
becomes even more apparent.
Yeah.
So the biography gives us this really comprehensive account of the Manhattan Project. It outlines Oppenheimer's leadership style, just the sheer scale of the operation.
Yeah.
And then, of course, all of the moral dilemmas that the scientists face. And it even, goes into detail about the debates over using the bomb against Japan.
Right.
Like Sillard's petition, urging Truman to at least consider a demonstration of the bomb's power before actually, dropping it on a city.
Yeah, it's incredibly meticulously researched.
Oh, yeah.
And it gives us this window into all of these sort of behind-the-scenes anxieties and debates happening at the time. So how does the film begin to capture all of that?
Well, Nolan does what he does best. He distills and intensifies. The film's focus is really on the emotional and psychological toll that this takes on Oppenheimer.
Right.
And he uses sound design to achieve this. That stark contrast between the complete silence of the Trinity test and then the relentless rhythmic stamping, which we later understand represents Oppenheimer's internal turmoil.
Right.
It's just masterful.
Oh, it's so good. It gives me chills just thinking about it.
It gets under your skin.
Yeah.
In a way that words on a page simply can't.
And that's the power of cinema.
Yeah.
It can tap into our emotions directly. It bypasses the need for, lengthy explanations. What's amazing to me is that both the biography and the film, in their own very different ways, force us to grapple with the same question. How do we reconcile scientific progress with moral responsibility?
And how do you think they each do that? What are the different ways that they approach that question?
It seems like they both do it effectively,
Yeah.
but they're offering these different lenses through which to understand this very profound dilemma.
It's almost as if each one is a counterpoint to the other.
Yeah.
Highlighting the tension between a very factual, chronological approach and a much more emotionally driven cinematic one.
It's like they're two sides of the same coin, each revealing something essential about the complexity of Oppenheimer's story.
Yes.
And I think that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating.
It's not just about comparing and contrasting.
Right.
It's about recognizing that each form of storytelling offers unique insights. And by engaging with both, we can come away with a richer, more multifaceted understanding of Oppenheimer and his legacy.
We're trying to figure out how this comprehensive biography that you've given us and Christopher Nolan's film, how they both offer these distinct perspectives on this really interesting guy, the so-called father of the atomic bomb.
And both sources really force us to wrestle with it.
Yeah.
The biography in particular, details the internal anxieties and the debates that were happening within the Manhattan Project.
Right.
Really highlighting that tension between the pursuit of knowledge and the weight of conscience. And we see Oppenheimer grappling with this. He's clearly driven by this scientific curiosity, but becoming increasingly aware of the potential consequences of unlocking this kind of power.
And it wasn't just him either.
Yeah, not at all.
I mean, the biography really reminds us that other scientists were having these anxieties too.
Yeah.
Like Sillard's petition.
Right.
Urging Truman to consider a demonstration of the bomb's power before actually using it against Japan.
It's a fascinating document.
It is.
Because it shows that, these were brilliant minds, but they weren't naive to the moral implications of what they were doing.
Right. They understood the gravity of the situation.
Absolutely. And I think it speaks to this internal struggle that was happening within the scientific community itself. And while the film might not have, the space to lay out all of those arguments and anxieties in such detail, Nolan finds other ways to bring those moral complexities to light.
He really does. And visually, there's that image of Oppenheimer walking through a sea of disintegrating bodies.
Right.
Almost like he's being haunted by the specter of death.
Yeah, it's a powerful way to convey the psychological burden of creating a weapon like that.
It is. And then there's that scene where Oppenheimer imagines, a nuclear chain reaction being triggered by a simple handshake.
Yeah.
Like the world just being consumed by fire.
It's so unsettling.
It is. It's just a brief moment, but it speaks volumes about the sheer terror of those possibilities.
I think Nolan's really good at using those kinds of cinematic techniques.
He is.
To amplify the emotional and psychological dimensions of the story.
Yeah.
It's not just about understanding the science or the history. It's about making the audience feel the weight of those moral dilemmas.
It's like the film takes those moral anxieties that are simmering beneath the surface in the biography and just turns the heat up to 11.
Totally. And that's what makes comparing these two sources so enriching. They each approach the same moral question, but from such different angles. And it gives us this much more holistic understanding than either one could achieve on its own.
Well, speaking of perspectives, let's turn back to Oppenheimer's personal relationships.
Okay.
Which is something that the biography really delves into. His affair with Jean Tatlock,
right,
a member of the Communist Party.
You can totally see why they were drawn to each other intellectually.
Right.
But their political beliefs and, just their personal struggles ultimately kind of pulled them apart.
And of course, then there's her tragic death by suicide. That detail really hit me hard while I was reading the biography.
Yeah, I can see why.
It makes you wonder how much that loss haunted him.
Right.
Especially during, the pressures of the Manhattan Project.
Yeah, it's impossible to say for sure. But the biography certainly suggests that it had a profound impact.
Yeah, it adds another layer of tragedy to his story. I mean, it reminds us that even brilliant minds are subject to the same heartbreak and loss. And while the film does weave Tatlock into the narrative through those kind of fragmented flashbacks,
right,
it focuses more on the intensity of their connection than the nuances of their relationship or the lasting impact of her death.
Yeah, that's true. It's another example, I think, of how the film prioritizes emotional resonance over, detailed exposition.
And it works.
Yeah, I think so. Those glimpses into their passionate past, give us a sense of their connection.
Right.
But the biography provides a much richer understanding of its complexities.
Yeah, it's like the film is trying to create this visual and emotional shorthand for Oppenheimer's inner life.
Right.
Using those flashbacks and recurring images and that jarring sound design to evoke the turmoil beneath the surface.
It's a very different approach, but incredibly effective in its own right.
It is, and it highlights how cinematic storytelling can convey these complex psychological states through, visual and auditory cues, rather than relying solely on dialogue or description. But we can't forget about Oppenheimer's relationship with Kitty. Yeah, the biography paints a portrait of a marriage that was both loving and challenging, strained by their different personalities.
Yeah.
And Oppenheimer's infidelities.
Kitty was a remarkable woman, though.
She was.
I mean, it's clear that she loved him deeply, but she also had to navigate his complexities, intense focus on his work, and the political scrutiny that they faced together.
And the relationship really comes to life in the film, too.
It does.
Especially in those scenes where we see them arguing, supporting each other.
Yeah.
Navigating the pressures of Los Alamos.
Yeah.
And the aftermath of the bomb.
Right. It's not always pretty.
No.
But it feels real. You really see the depth of their bond and the strains that are placed upon it.
By everything.
Yeah, by everything.
By his work, by his personality, by the weight of the world that they're carrying. Right. It adds another dimension to our understanding of Oppenheimer. It reminds us that even amid world-altering events, human relationships remain this constant source of both support and complexity.
Absolutely.
It's a reminder that even the most brilliant minds are still subject to the joys and struggles
of human connection.
The same fundamental question.
Which is?
What does it mean to be human in the face of such immense power?
That's a big one.
It is. And it's a question that resonates today more than ever.
Yeah.
As we grapple with new scientific breakthroughs and their potential to reshape our world.
In ways we can't even fully anticipate.
And that's where I think this conversation gets really interesting. Because Oppenheimer's story isn't just about the past. It's about the future, too.
Yeah, it serves as both a cautionary tale and a call to action.
I like that.
It reminds us that we have a responsibility to engage critically with scientific progress, consider the ethical implications of our discoveries, and ensure that, that knowledge is used for the betterment of humanity, not its destruction.
Not for blowing ourselves up.
Exactly.
So we've explored the events.
Yeah.
The moral dilemmas, the complexities of Oppenheimer's personal relationship. But what about the narrative styles themselves? How does the biography's very detailed chronological approach compare to the film's dramatic compression? How does each source make you feel about Oppenheimer and his legacy?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it gets to the heart of how different forms of storytelling, shape our understanding.
Right.
I think the biography, with its layered, evidence-driven approach, offers a kind of intellectual satisfaction. It's like piecing together a complex puzzle. You gain this really comprehensive, nuanced understanding
Of the man and the forces that shaped him.
Exactly.
And I love how it pulls you in with those really fascinating details. Poisoned apple incident.
Yes.
Or the intricacies of his relationships.
You really get a sense of the man beneath the myth. But then you have Nolan's film.
Yeah.
Which takes a completely different route. It's not about presenting a complete or objective picture. It's about creating this immersive, emotionally resonant experience. I walked out of the theater feeling shaken, haunted by those images and sounds. And the film doesn't shy away from the darkness.
No, it doesn't.
The anxiety, the sheer terror of what he unleashed. And that's the power of cinema, right? And tap into our emotions in a way that a book, even a brilliant biography, simply can't.
So we've got the biography offering this intellectual deep dive, and the film delivering this gut-wrenching emotional punch.
Right.
But which is more effective?
I honestly don't think I could say.
Yeah.
I think they're both equally valid. They speak to different aspects of our experience, different ways of processing and engaging with the world.
What about for you? What struck you about how each source made you feel about Oppenheimer?
Well, I think the biography leads to a more nuanced understanding.
Okay.
Maybe even a grudging respect for his brilliance and the impossible choices that he faced. But the film evokes something much deeper, almost a sense of dread.
Right.
Like a visceral understanding of the profound and lasting consequences of our actions.
Right. I mean, that's a fantastic observation.
Thanks.
And it really highlights how powerful both forms of storytelling can be in eliciting these very different responses from an audience. The biography encourages us to think. The film makes us feel.
And maybe that's the point. By engaging with both, we get this more complete picture, one that speaks to both our heads and our hearts.
That's a great way of putting it. So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
It's really amazing how Oppenheimer's life sits at this crossroads, of science, politics, ethics, and just pure human ambition.
Yeah.
It's a story that makes us confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the choices we make, individually and as a species.
Yeah, we've talked about the moral dilemmas that the scientists face, but what about the political pressures of the time?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, both the biography and the film show how Oppenheimer was operating under incredible secrecy.
Right.
With the weight of the world quite literally on his shoulders.
Yeah, that context is crucial, I think. It's easy to judge with hindsight.
Right.
But Oppenheimer and his team were working under wartime conditions.
Yeah.
They were racing against Nazi Germany to develop this weapon of unimaginable power.
Yeah, their decisions were shaped by forces far larger than themselves.
Absolutely.
And the biography does a fantastic job of laying out those internal conflicts.
It does.
The debates, the anxieties,
right.
the agonizing choices that they had to make with limited information and just this immense responsibility.
And Nolan, in his own way, brings that pressure to life visually. Remember that interrogation scene where Oppenheimer is being grilled about his past associations? The way Nolan frames it, it's almost as if Oppenheimer is being crushed by the weight of history itself, haunted by the ghosts of his own decisions.
It's a powerful reminder that even actions taken with good intentions can have unintended and often devastating consequences. Which brings us right back to that central question. How much responsibility did Oppenheimer bear for what his creation unleashed?
It's the question, isn't it? And it's one that continues to be debated.
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't think there's a simple answer. Biography and the film both give us glimpses into Oppenheimer's evolving views on the bomb, his internal struggle, and his post-war efforts to advocate for control of nuclear weapons.
Yeah, the biography is really detailed about his activism. The warnings that he issued about a potential arms race. His attempts to come to terms with what he had helped create. It paints a picture of a man burdened by his conscience seeking some kind of redemption.
And I find it so interesting how Nolan chooses to end the film with that haunting encounter between Oppenheimer and Einstein.
Yeah.
There's no judgment passed. the shared sense of unease, recognition of the weight of their actions and the implications, that will ripple outward for generations to come.
Yeah. It's one of those scenes that really stays with you. It makes you think, how much control can any one person, even a brilliant mind like Oppenheimer, have over the forces they unleash upon the world?
Right. It's a question that resonates so strongly, I think, with a lot of the challenges we face today. From climate change to artificial intelligence. We're constantly grappling with the unintended consequences of scientific advancement.
Which is maybe the most enduring part of Oppenheimer's story. It's true legacy.
His legacy.
Yeah. It's a reminder that progress isn't just about equations and discoveries. It's about the choices that we make, ethical consideration, the immense responsibility that comes with shaping the future of humanity.
And both the biography and the film, in their own unique ways, challenge us to embrace that responsibility. To think critically about the implications of our actions. Even the most brilliant minds are still human, capable of both great good and terrible harm.
Well, this deep dive has taken us on quite a journey.
It has.
We've explored the life of a very complicated and controversial figure.
Yeah.
Delved into the world of nuclear physics and the political tensions of the mid-20th century. And grappled with these enormous questions about science ethics.
Right.
And what it means to be human in an age of unprecedented power.
And we've seen how different forms of storytelling can bring unique insights to the same narrative. The detailed chronological depth of a biography versus the visceral emotional impact of a film, each offering its own piece of the puzzle.
So as we wrap up, what do we hope you as the listener will take away from our deep dive into Oppenheimer?
I think it's about embracing complexity, recognizing that history and the individuals who shape it are rarely black and white. It's about asking questions, challenging assumptions, and considering multiple perspectives, understanding that knowledge is power.
Yeah.
And with that power comes a profound responsibility.
Beautifully put.
Oh.
And on that note, we'll leave you with a final call to action.
Okay.
Engage with the world around you.
Yeah.
Seek out different perspectives and use your knowledge to make informed choices. Choices that shape a future worthy of our shared humanity.
Because in the end, the pursuit of understanding is a journey we all share. And the more perspectives we encounter, the richer that understanding becomes.
That concludes our deep dive into J. Robert Oppenheimer. We hope you've enjoyed the exploration, and we encourage you to continue wrestling with these really complex and fascinating questions. Until next time.